Hello and welcome. My name is John Conroth. I'm an associate principal at Wolf Brown. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a middle-aged white guy with light brown hair and a bushy beard. Today I'm wearing a white shirt with red and blue graph checkered pattern on it. My background is a light, almost white room. I'd like to begin today's session by acknowledging the indigenous people of all the lands that we are on today. I'm currently speaking from my home in Alameda, California, which is on the land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. I acknowledge their presence, affirm indigenous sovereignty, and applaud the language and cultural revitalization work that the Ohlone and other Native communities of the San Francisco Bay Area are doing. Wolf Brown is committed to working with BIPOC-centered organizations to provide free or low-cost research opportunities through the Audience Outlook Monitor program. If you represent an Indigenous or BIPOC or other BIPOC organization and are interested in partnering with us, please do reach out to me or any of my colleagues on the call today. If you'd like, please add your own land acknowledgement in the chat. And we'd also welcome you to enter your organization and your location and your job title, if you like, just so we have a better sense of who's with us today. All right, we continue to educate ourselves about the continuing contributions of Indigenous artists to our sector, and work to support and increase awareness and understanding of Indigenous art in our research and consulting work. We're thrilled to have you here for this town hall discussion. This, for those of you who don't know, is part of the Audience Outlook Monitor learning series. The Audience Outlook Monitor is really a community of practice. It's where arts and cultural professionals who share an interest in the cultural sector's understanding of audiences through research, data, and knowledge sharing gather and exchange information. In addition to the newsletter, the webinars that we do like this one today, and periodic research briefs that are offered through the learning community, we also do cohort-based audience surveys in which groups of arts organizations around the country join together and deploy surveys to their audiences. The data is then shared with all participating organizations through a common dashboard. So the organizations can see how their audiences compare to those of peer institutions and national averages. I mention this because this is really the context that prompted today's conversation. Last fall, we launched the Audience Outlook Monitor Idea Study, which was focused on audience attitudes towards inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. But as we got into that, we quickly realized that accessibility is in itself such a huge topic that we really couldn't squeeze that in with all of the other content that we were interested in exploring through that survey. So it really needed its own study, and that's what led us to today. And we're now considering this the kind of launch of our second phase of that idea study. And what we really are hoping for in today's conversation is to gain a better understanding of what the field itself needs to learn about our audiences in terms of their accessibility needs, the accessibility services we provide, and how we can make our programs more accessible to more people. As with all of our studies, we see ourselves not here as so much as the subject matter experts, but rather as co-learners who are here to kind of help learn alongside of you. But we're delighted that we do have some experts from the National Endowments, from the Arts Accessibility Office with us here. And we'll start off our conversation today in just a little bit with a brief discussion with them about core issues in the field before splitting up into breakout rooms for more focused conversations. All right, I'm going to start just by framing this conversation a little bit. So this is really just a kind of a napkin sketch of an initial brainstorming session that we held internally to try and like map out the entire field of accessibility as it relates to the arts. I'll just briefly go through this. We kind of have different arrange different tiers or layers in kind of stripes across this slide, starting with the generative artists, by which we're referring to playwrights and composers and so forth. Then we have the performance in the second row, the works that are presented in the third, under that reception, and below that access, and then in the bottom row, audiences. And there are different aspects within this that we're considering. And really what we kind of gained through this initial exercise was that, of course, there are accessibility issues all over this map, ranging from which artists' work are we presenting on our stages? Are the backstage areas equipped so that artists with disabilities can access those spaces and can perform on our stages? Are we telling stories that represent the realities of people with disabilities? So there are a huge range of questions. And due to the nature of the audience outlook monitor and the particular survey tool that we have and our way of doing audience surveys, I just want to kind of point out that we are going to be focusing today's conversation on these bottom two rows of this larger map, focusing on the audiences and the ways in which audiences access our work in our performing arts venues and museums as well. Again, this is not a publishable kind of ready, fully worked out framework. This is really just a kind of napkin sketch of jotting down some of our initial thinking. But I just wanted to kind of call your attention to the larger framework here, and that we're just looking at a smaller slice of that. There are a couple framing thoughts that I'd like to share for today's conversation. One is that we are approaching this topic primarily through the lens of accessibility, which is clearly related to disability, but not only about disability. And on that note, I mean, as you're well aware, a lot of people who don't identify as having disabilities still take advantage of accessibility services. And to kind of prompt the thinking around that, we'd like to invite you to write into the chat if you take advantage of any accessibility services or have in the past or have attended arts events with people who use those services and would like to share what those are and what you appreciate about them. I want to be clear that we're not asking you to disclose whether or not you have a disability, but it's more about the range of people that use which services. While you do that, I'm going to continue on. The second piece I want to highlight here is that we're approaching disability not as a binary. It's not either that we have audiences with disabilities and those without, but there's a large continuum there. And there are many people who might be temporarily living with a disability. As we know, those of you who have children who are parents know that we make all kinds of accommodations for the youngest members of our families. And as we age, we might grow to appreciate accommodations that we didn't previously take advantage of. And we just want to kind of call attention to that spectrum here. And the final piece that I'd like to mention is that and this perhaps the kind of most controversial aspect here or kind of forward thinking, is that there's no correct way of experiencing art. And in our experiences of the way that accessibility is often approached in organization is that there's an assumption that the work is created with a kind of normative assumption of what the experience of the work is. But if you think about it, you know, if you have an opera performance with an audience of 1,000 people, those 1,000 people aren't going to have the same experience. Some were sitting right up close. Some were sitting way back up in the nosebleeds. Some of them are opera connoisseurs who know every aria in the performance. Others are there for their first time. So already just in that auditorium, arguably no two experiences are exactly the same. And the way that we'd like to think about accessibility is that we're creating kind of different ways of experiencing the work, and that there isn't necessarily one correct way of doing that. So it's not necessarily that there's the correct way of experiencing the work, and we need to kind of compensate for the fact that not everyone is able to experiencing it in that way, but rather that we might just create more opportunities for more people to experience the work in ways that are equally fulfilling and aesthetically relevant and so forth. Okay, so with that, I want to, so as I mentioned, we are at the outset of this second phase of research, but we do already have some data that I briefly want to go through from previous studies. So this is from our survey of demographics and biobehavior that we conducted last year, where we did ask some questions that are relevant to today's conversation. So here you're seeing the responses. We had over 8,000 responses from performing arts organizations, most of them multidisciplinary organizations. 1,500 were from classical music, but we also had some theater and dance in there as well. And so what we're seeing here is just the overall breakdown of kind of how people responded to this question of which accessibility services or programs you or a member of your household would benefit from. And you see here the boxes that are checked most frequently are limited mobility and deafness and hearing impairment. Then if we split this out by age, we actually see, you know, that mobility issues increase with age, but as do deafness and hearing impairment. However, memory impairment and blindness and visual impairment are relatively consistent across age groups, and neurodiversity and differences in sensory processing are actually higher for the younger age cohorts that we surveyed. And again, I just want to kind of highlight these just to kind of acknowledge that we have already been doing some of this work in the past. I'm not going to get into the details of each of these, but we have follow-up questions then about the types of services people would appreciate. In this case, we're seeing the accessibility services for people with limited mobility, which is a broad range of different services. Again, I'm not going to get into these in detail because we're already a little bit behind time here. But we'll hope to take advantage of these as we get into the survey planning and design process more fully. All right. With that, I would like to introduce our two guests, Beth Bienvenue and Catherine Hayward from the National Endowments for the Arts. And I'll start just by asking you to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Beth Bienvenue. I am the Director of Accessibility at the National Endowment for the Arts. I'm a white woman with shoulder-length brown hair wearing a blue and white print top, and my background is Black with the NEA logo on it. And so I'd like to thank John and his team for really engaging in this work. It's so important. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here as well.
Hello, everyone. I'll just say a quick hello. My name is Catherine Hayward. I am the Accessibility Specialist at the National Endowment for the Arts. I am a slightly sunburned white woman with my long curly hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a bright orange blouse with black and white floral pattern with the black and white National Endowment for the Arts logo background.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you so much for being with us today. To start off, I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about the Office of Accessibility at the NEA and what you do and whom you primarily serve.
Sure, I'll go ahead. This is Beth. So I'm going to assume that you know who the NEA is. We're a federal agency that funds the arts, so our office was founded way back in the 1970s to respond to the needs of the field and the new legal requirements under the Rehabilitation Act. And we provide technical assistance to the arts field to make the arts accessible, both for programs and facilities, and making sure that it's inclusive and equitable for people with disabilities. We do this for our grant applicants and grantees, as well as the rest of the arts field. So we're really here as a resource for the field. We do this through one-on-one conversations over the phone and email, through training, both whether it's for a specific group or nationally. And especially now that we have virtual options, we're doing trainings all over the country now, which is really exciting. And we also produce resources and guides. We work with the 56 state and territorial arts agencies and the 6 national regional arts organizations. And we work to make sure they're trained not only in their responsibilities under the law, for how they do their own work and how they re-grant their funds, but also just so that they can better serve their state and make sure that people with disabilities are being served. And finally, we work to support careers in the arts for people with disabilities, recognizing the important work that they're doing, but also the barriers that people are facing to working in the arts. So we do this through convenings, research, providing tools, working with other agencies, and helping to promote opportunities. So I'm going to put a link in the chat to our new Careers in the Arts Toolkit for people with disabilities. I also want to give a shout out. I see a couple of state arts agency folks. I see Charles Baldwin on here, so just want to give him a little wave.
Excellent, thank you. And when people reach out to you, what types of questions and concerns do they typically have about increasing their accessibility?
Hi, this is Catherine speaking. I'll answer this one since often I am the person that you'll get to speak with. If you reach out to us, I put our accessibility email in the chat because, as Beth mentioned, we're a resource for all of you. I often speak with people about their questions around accessibility, as well as if you receive funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, there are expectations as well as requirements, and you are asked about that at the point of which you might get an offer letter. You are asked to explain how you are both physically and programmatically accessible to all of those involved in the project. So that includes staff, that includes hopefully some artists with disabilities, as well as the audience or the community that you're trying to bring in for your event. And one of the things that comes up a lot, particularly for small nonprofit organizations, but really many of the organizations that I speak with, thankfully, most people have good intentions and they want to be accessible, but they have questions about how. And I think particularly around what we kind of call program accessibility, which really has to do with how people are able to communicate and receive information, as well as how they can fully participate in your arts activities. So I talk with them about ways to create that welcoming environment, ways that don't cost money, ways that you can structure your invitational language about an event, the way that you promote it, who you promote it to, finding those community organizations that are doing arts and disability work. So a lot of it is really tailoring to the specific arts activities that are happening. And for those of you that may be trying to figure out, well, I might need to, or we want to provide a sign language interpreter, but where do I find one? So also kind of practical resources on where to look for and find the people that can provide access services that may be, specifically being requested. But I think that's as much as I'll say, but happy to answer any specific questions, and particularly if you want to reach out later to work with any of you around your specific arts activities.
Well, thank you. That's such a fantastic resource to have, and be careful what you wish for when you extend that invitation to everyone on today's call. I guess one thing you mentioned is kind of working with local disability arts groups or just kind of disability rights groups. And that's something I wanted to follow up on. If you have any kind of best practices or recommendations in terms of when arts organizations should consult with disability groups or just their own patrons who have disabilities, and how to avoid overburdening those advisory groups with too many requests.
Yeah, I'll jump in first. This is Beth. I want to thank you for mentioning that and acknowledging that this can become a burden on people if you're calling on them too much. And there's a couple of approaches to having advisory groups. One is just to have, if I can mention an outdated, possibly outdated technology, have a Rolodex of a lot of people. When I started this job, my predecessor had an actual Rolodex with all sorts of people that she consulted with, people with different disabilities, different art forms, different groups across the country that you can tap into, and just, that are willing to pick up the phone, if we're still using phones, to talk with you. And the other is to actually have advisory groups that meet and convene. And of course, you don't want to burden them. And the main bit of advice I give for that is to pay them, that they are giving their time and their expertise, their own lived experience. And so, offer to pay them for their time. And I'll pass it to Catherine, who has some other thoughts.
Yeah, and in terms of your first question, this is Catherine. The when now, as soon as possible. Do not wait for your project to begin. I really encourage you to start reaching out, or at least educating yourself about who is in your community and within your state. And, to be mindful that relationships take time. And that's why I'm saying start now. You can't call someone up a week before your event and ask them to do something when you don't have that relationship sort of built. As Beth mentions, be respectful that this is an expertise, and you should pay for that expertise the same way you would for, other areas where you might be looking for consultants or looking to sort of partner. I think the one thing I'll add is, when you're asking for something, also be prepared to be able to offer something. If it's not like an actual monetary payment, to think about ways that maybe you can provide space. Maybe you can promote it within your networks, just the way that you might be asking them to do for you. So to remember that this should be a reciprocal relationship, and that can, there are different ways for that to be reciprocal, but remember that when you're asking to also offer and give, and I think people will be more willing to engage in those conversations.
And if I could just jump in again, there's a phrase in the field, in the disability rights movement, nothing about us without us, which has evolved to nothing without us. So make sure you consult with people when you're creating new programs, new artistic creations, to make sure that people with disabilities are being depicted accurately or included in the right way, and the access is there. And also, there's a burgeoning field of accessibility consultants that you could just hire somebody who might have that breadth of experience that can help you with that. Excellent points. Thank you.
So I think we have time for one more question before we head into our breakouts. So maybe just to kind of spur that conversation that's to come, are there any trends or developments or new technologies in the field that you're particularly excited about in the accessibility field?
This is Beth again. I'll jump in. I'm just excited to see the growth in the field and the interest and the awareness. 5 years ago, we might not have seen groups like this convening, other than some groups, but just not as much broad interest. I started working in the field in 2010, and prior to that, I had some connection, and I've just seen it growing leaps and bounds. And one metric for that is the Leadership Exchange on Arts and Disability Conference and Network that's run by the Kennedy Center. The conference started in 2001 with 25 people. In 2011, they had 200 people. Now they're up to 1,000. And these are all professionals from organizations like yours, and maybe some of you, that attend this conference, that the organization invests that time and money for people to go and learn. And I think that's a huge indication. Yes, it's going to be in Seattle this year at the tail end of July, early August. Just so much more awareness, so much more interest. And the fact that DEI now includes the A, that organizations are including it and thinking about the perspective of disabled artists, and then audiences making their backstages accessible, making their studios accessible. So just more interest. It also brings up more challenges because people are looking for the money for it and other things. But it's all exciting to see the growth. And Catherine?
And I'll add, this is Catherine. Are you hearing me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. This is Catherine. I would just add that I would check your state arts agency and regional arts organization for what they're doing. Many, all of them have an accessibility coordinator, which is also a requirement when you receive NEA funding. So they're also a good point person that may, have kind of their finger on the pulse of what's happening in your area. And in terms of the growth that Beth was saying, I've been so excited to see the state arts agencies and regional arts organizations take a lead in this area. And a lot of them are doing great work in accessibility. With COVID, things became more virtual, and that included training. So now we all get to benefit from, an accessibility training webinar panel that maybe one state had that we wouldn't otherwise have access to. And so you'll find archived information. Some of them are doing really interesting work and starting accessibility grants, or have grant opportunities, particularly for disabled artists. And I find that really exciting to see others sort of taking up in this work and really pushing it beyond the compliance, and really to dive deeper into what accessibility means and how it really is about community connection and community engagement, and not just sort of, the requirements, which unfortunately I think people kind of, snooze to a little bit, but I think these deeper conversations. So check out, your state and region.
Excellent. Thank you. And on behalf of the entire group here, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I really loved hearing about the programs and your various suggestions for kind of moving forward as a field. So we're going to shift gear a little bit and move on to the breakouts. I am joined here today by several colleagues from Wolf Brown, Alan Klein, Erin Gold, Soral Phillips, Alan Brown, and Anik Odom is running our tech for today, and a big thank you for all of them. I've been kind of moved into the moderator role for today's session, but really this has been a group effort throughout, and I really appreciate everything that my colleagues have contributed to this. We're going to split out into the breakouts. Each breakout group will be moderated by one of the Wolf Brown team. We'll ask someone within each group to volunteer as a scribe. And to then report back to the group in about 15 minutes or so. And just to go over the topics again for the breakouts, one is increasing access through new formats. The second is emerging technologies that increase accessibility. The third is communications and ticketing. Fourth is patron services and venue accessibility. And the fourth is programming for people who can't attend in person. All right, well, thank you. And thank you all of you who are rejoining us. Welcome back. So we have just a couple of minutes to share out from each of our sessions.
John, we were in the technology group, and Andrea is raring to go with our summary.
All right. Excellent. Then let's just go ahead and start there then.
Hey, so we had a lot to discuss. We were really interested in, new access features for digital programming, such as captioning and all of those things that we learned, and how we could maybe bring those in from the virtual world back into the in-person world. We also talked about how human captioning is always better, but there's also not quite the pipeline set up of replacing the human captioners for spaces. So are there ways that we can augment and support developing AI to also support that? We also talked a lot about live captioning of theater, that it's an expense, but that the budget also is a way that you kind of create your moral directive. And that one of our members shared a link about live captioning here with Get Access Tech. I put it in the chat, as well as audio description and voicing. We also don't know what is emerging, and so we're always curious about other people and what they think about. We talked about the sign glasses, which allows ASL transmitted on lenses to be in line of sight, as well as sound shirts and vibrotactile devices, and the sub pack, which are different ways that people can feel vibrations or other sounds to support people, and then figuring out how to get these technologies into theater. We talked about Gala Pro, which was developed for Broadway, and that there's also limitations with that. We also talked about ways to get personal devices of audience members to be used as assistive devices, and those are currently being used with assistive listening and audio description, such as with Sennheiser's assistive listening, Mobile Connect, and the Listen Tech from Listen Everywhere Wi-Fi based systems and Bluetooth, and integrating creative captioning, such as putting it more in design as a creative opportunity rather than being just limited in an access tacked on. And
thank you. That sounds like a great conversation. And just so you know, we do plan to kind of summarize all of this information and share that out after this conversation, so that other groups, if you heard something Andrea's recap here, that you'll have access to that as well. All right, then let's move ahead to the new formats session. Who was the scribe there?
Carolyn was our scribe, but I will quickly, unless Carolyn, you want to recount, I can go through it quickly.
Please.
We talked a lot about what a new format is, a way of presenting work that you might not normally, and thinking about what audiences that attracts. We talked about sensory sensitive concerts and how those expand an ASL interpretation, how these things get requested, and then how you build that into your long-term planning and things that become normal, and that idea of how do you make this a part of your normal process. We also talked about collaboration and how by working across disciplines or with people from other communities, that can work as a springboard for new formats. And we spent a bit of time talking about when these are presented and they're not taken up, so that you do, say you have a sensory-friendly kit or ASL interpreters and people are not coming and using them, and how there may still be value to that because people are bringing their own materials, and knowing that you are a place that welcomes that and encourages that and has stuff there as a backup if they need it, so that even while you may do something it doesn't seem to be taken up on, it still has value and communicates something important.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan, and to everyone in that group. Let's move on to communications and ticketing. Who was this?
Yeah, so this is Sorella. This was my group. And we talked about the accessibility barriers that people are aware of in their current communications and ticketing system, how people are finding out about them, how they're being monitored and evaluated, and when people inform organizations about their preferences for different accessibility services. That was basically it. And Wendy took fantastic notes, and I'm going to turn the mic over to her.
Thanks. So we started with barriers that we're working to overcome. And one of the first things that was brought up is websites and ticketing systems not being screen reader friendly, and trying to make sure that we're focusing on that. One of the things that just was brought up is that Tessitura is working into increasing that with version 16. So if any organizations are on Tessitura, there should be developments coming soon with that. Another organization talked about that they're building their programs, which is amazing, but now having trouble trying to make sure that they're communicating all of them and having enough space to communicate everything properly while making it accessible and easy to read all the information. Someone from the Baltimore Museum of Art talked about how they have accessibility ushers that are stationed at various locations that specifically say, like, ask me accessibility questions, both near their accessible seating as well as like near the entrance. And then we are also just talking about different ways to get information out and having an accessibility web page on a website to make sure that everything's all in one place. And along with that, we talked about different ways to display information where PDFs are not always the most accessible. They need to be as simple and linear as possible. And sometimes if you can provide a Word document, that can be much more accessible because people can change the font size and change things to make it accessible for themselves. We also talked about how even having a
I hate to interrupt, but we only have like another 2 minutes, and we have 2 more groups that need to share. So as I said, we have access to your notes, and we will share these out afterwards, but I'd like to try and get through the 2 remaining groups. Thank you so much for that, Wendy and Sir Alan and the rest of that group. Let's move on to the programming for remote audiences. And
John,
again, if we can keep this to a minute.
You can skip over me. There was only one person in my group, and it was actually an audience member, so we had a very different conversation. So go ahead, and since we're short on time, just skip over me for now.
Okay, well, we look forward to hearing more about that later. So patron services and venues, that was my group. So Lisa, would you
Sure.
be able to share?
Yes, hi, Lisa Murray from UMS in Michigan. We talked about challenges that we face or concerns we have about patron in-venue experiences. A number of people in our group work in buildings that are historical landmarks, face challenges in terms of wanting to make accessibility upgrades, but it becomes there are lots of competing priorities given that it's a historic building. Also, when you're in a historic building, how do you make sure that you're being inviting while also making it clear what your space can and cannot do? There were also challenges of prioritization of inventory. Let's see, challenges in policy versus practices, that organizations may have formal processes in place, but what actually happens in practice can be very different. The rest is in the notes.
All right, thank you so much. Well, this does put us right at time. I'm just going to pull up as a final kind of preview of what's to come. Just a quick timeline here. That, as you will see, we're planning to open registration for this cohort survey on August 5th. And registration will close at the beginning of September, and we're hoping to deploy this survey in October, on October 8th. So that just gives you a rough sense of the timeline. We will be looking for more input as we get into the design process. So there'll be opportunities for those who are interested to contribute to that. And for now, I just want to thank everyone for being here, for having such great conversations and sharing this time with us. As I said, we'll be sharing more information, including the slides that I pulled up earlier with some of that existing data that we have, and I didn't get to go through in detail. We can share that afterwards as well, so that you can go through that on your own time. I apologize that we had to rush through some of that. So thanks again for being here, and look forward to continuing this conversation as we move forward. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.